The engine had broken 3 senior engineers across 11 days. It sat motionless at the center of the workshop like an unsolved equation no one wanted to inherit, and the most important race of the year was 72 hours away. That was when Elias arrived. He had not been assigned to it. He had no business touching it. He was nothing more than a general floor mechanic, a single father working long shifts to keep his 7-year-old daughter clothed and fed. Yet he lowered himself beside that engine in the depth of night, listened to it the way a man listens to someone he loves when they cannot find words, and had it running again within 8 hours. The next morning, CEO Vivian summoned him to her office and let him go for unauthorized interference with company property. What she did not know was that Elias had designed that engine himself. Keep reading, because the man they treated as invisible was the one who had built everything they were celebrating. Elias's apartment was the kind of place that communicated everything without a single decoration. Compact, orderly, arranged not from necessity but from the discipline of a man who had learned long ago to carry only what truly mattered. 2 mugs sat on the kitchen counter, no more, no less. The shelves held technical references, not fiction, and in the corner near the storage closet, fixed with a single pin, hung a folded sheet of paper, a technical drawing of some kind, its lines too deliberate and precise to be anything casual. He never explained it to the rare visitor, and visitors were rare. Nora was 7 years old and had already learned that mornings ran on a schedule. She sat at the kitchen table with her stuffed bear, a small, soft thing shaped vaguely like a gear that she had named Bolt, propped against her glass of apple juice as though it deserved a seat at the table too. She wore the same pair of moon-print socks every Tuesday, because Tuesdays, she had decided, required luck, and Elias had never once challenged that reasoning. "Will you be home before dinner?" she asked, not lifting her eyes from her toast. Elias placed her lunchbox on the counter and weighed the answer with the same care he gave most things. "I'll do my best," he said. Not a guarantee, not a dismissal, just an honest acknowledgement that the distance between leaving and returning held more uncertainty than any person could fully predict. Nora accepted it the way she accepted most things her father told her, with a slow nod and the uncomplicated trust of a child who had never been let down enough to build doubt. He tied her shoes before she left for the neighbor's care, pulling the laces with a particular tension. Not tight enough to pinch, not loose enough to slip mid-step. For a brief, involuntary moment, his mind mapped the friction coefficient of the knot against the lace material. Then he stopped himself, looked away, the way a man averts his eyes from something he doesn't want to confront first thing in the morning. Apex Motorsport occupied 3 city blocks on the western edge of the industrial district, a compound of glass and polished steel that the late Gerald Vance had constructed from a single rented bay and a refusal to accept that American racing couldn't match European engineering. The company now carried a valuation north of $2 billion. It employed nearly 400 people across 5 countries and had accumulated more championship trophies than its founder had ever allowed himself to say out loud. Vivian Vance had taken it over 20 months ago, 2 weeks after her father's funeral, at age 29, still learning what it meant to sit in a room where everyone looked to her before moving. Elias had joined 4 months before that. His application listed 8 years of general mechanical experience, 2 references that both checked out and nothing else. No degree, no engineering credentials beyond the standard safety requirements. His previous employer was listed as a small independent shop in Indiana that had since closed. The hiring manager flagged it as sparse. Daniel, the chief operating officer who sat on that quarter's hiring committee, had approved it without remark. Elias was posted to the sub-level floor, the basement workshop where ventilation was weakest and the concrete shuddered whenever the fabrication equipment ran overhead. It was the kind of assignment that experienced mechanics quietly transferred away from within a few months. Elias requested nothing. He showed up, completed every task given to him, and spent whatever quiet intervals remained walking the perimeter of the main floor, studying the cars with an attention that was difficult to characterize. His co-workers had taken to calling him the quiet one, then simply the basement guy, because he spoke only when there was something mechanical to discuss, and never once about himself. But sometimes, When he rested his palm flat against the body of one of the cars and closed his eyes for just a moment, the way a physician listens through a stethoscope for something instruments alone cannot capture, something crossed his expression that no one on sublevel could quite name. It was not focus exactly. It was closer to recognition. The crisis announced itself on a Tuesday morning with the sight of Henrik, the lead engineer, a 44-year-old graduate of a top technical university with 2 decades of competition-level experience, sitting down in his chair with great deliberateness and saying absolutely nothing for nearly a full minute. The GX9's fuel delivery system had failed in a manner that did not appear in any technical manual from any manufacturer at any version. The malfunction was in the tertiary pressure delivery sequence, a cascading failure that the diagnostic software identified as impossible given the current system configuration, which was its way of confessing that it had no answer. Henrik had spent 4 days on it. A pair of external specialists flown in from the German supplier had examined the car, conferred quietly, and departed without resolution. Daniel convened an emergency session on Thursday afternoon. His manner in those meetings never changed, deliberate, measured, carrying the faint suggestion of patience being rationed. The options, as he framed them, were 2: withdraw the race entry or substitute another vehicle. Both carried cost. Both carried reputational damage. The only question was how much of each the company could stomach. Vivian said neither. She said it plainly, without raising her voice, the way her father used to close certain conversations. Daniel held her gaze a beat longer than necessary, then wrote something in his notebook. Elias heard every word through the ventilation duct in the ceiling of the basement workshop. He was seated on an overturned parts crate with a cup of coffee that had long gone cold, staring upward at nothing in particular. When the voices above faded and the meeting ended, he remained there for a long while. Then he said, very quietly, to no one, "Tertiary pressure valve, secondary microseal. They've never looked at the first drawing." That evening, while he read to Nora from a picture book about how machines work, she asked him why gears needed each other to function. He paused longer than the question required. "Because by itself, a gear is just metal," he finally said. "It's only when they connect that something actually moves." Nora considered this seriously, adjusted her grip on bolt, and was asleep within 5 minutes. Elias sat beside her a while after her breathing settled, then carried the book to the kitchen table, opened it to the blank pages at the back, and began to draw. Not haltingly, not searching. His hand moved across the paper with the speed and confidence of someone transcribing something already fully formed in their mind. The lines were technical, fine, completely precise. He worked without looking up until well past midnight. At 2 in the morning, he drove back to the facility. His sub-level access card worked on the building entry. He was listed on the overnight maintenance rotation, and the system did not distinguish between basement clearance and upper workshop clearance. The GX9 bay had yellow tape across the entrance and a placard reading, "Authorized personnel only." Elias stepped over the tape without slowing. He brought no special equipment. He opened his standard kit on the floor beside the car and began disassembling from the exterior inward, removing panels in a sequence that did not appear in any current maintenance protocol, because the current protocol was 3 generations removed from the original design logic, and Elias was working from something older than any of that. He was working from memory. Not the uncertain memory of someone trying to recall a procedure, but the memory of someone who wrote the procedure in the first place. The tertiary pressure valve housing came apart in his hands exactly as it was meant to. He located the secondary microseal, a component so specific, so small, that it was absent from every version of the parts manifest in the company's current inventory system. Elias had installed it by hand during the original assembly, before the first test run, and had intended to document it formally afterward. Afterward had never arrived. He replaced the seal using a cross-referenced part number he carried in his head, reassembled the housing in reverse order, and ran a manual pressure check using the analog gauge on the wall, a gauge most of the current engineering staff didn't know how to read because it predated the digital diagnostic system by more than a decade. At 6:52 in the morning, the GX9's engine turned over and held. The idle was smooth. The pressure readings were exact. Elias wiped his hands on a shop rag, packed his kit, and went down to the basement to begin his regular shift. Marcus found him there at 7:20. The workshop supervisor was 56 years old, built like a man who had spent decades lifting things heavier than advisable and never once admitted it, and he wore a look Elias hadn't seen in a very long time. The expression of someone who has just confirmed a long-held suspicion and isn't entirely certain whether to feel relieved or unsettled. Marcus said nothing. He looked across the floor at the GX9. Then he looked at Elias, then back at the car. Elias met his eyes. A small, slow nod passed between them. Marcus walked away without a word. Henrik ran the full diagnostic suite at 7:30 and stood reading the output for a long time. Every pressure indicator was nominal. The fuel delivery variance was 0.01% below factory specification, lower than the car had ever recorded during actual testing. He called 2 members of his team over to confirm he was reading the screen correctly. They confirmed it. No one said anything for a while. Daniel had been working late on the upper floors when the repair took place. He reviewed it on the security feed, the timestamp, the access log, the unmistakable figure of the sub-level mechanic moving through the restricted bay with the certainty of someone who had been there before. Many times before. Daniel did not go to Vivian that night. He waited until morning, assembled the footage, organized the access records, and composed the presentation with care. He excluded the diagnostic results. He made no mention of the fact that the car now ran better than it ever had. When he sat across from Vivian in her office, he said, "We have an internal security matter. An unauthorized employee entered a restricted area and performed unsupervised intervention on our most critical asset without any form of clearance." Vivian reviewed the footage. The timestamp read 2:11 in the morning. The figure on the screen moved through the bay without hesitation, without confusion, without the tentative quality of someone doing something unfamiliar. "Is the car functioning?" she asked. "That's not the issue," Daniel said. "I'm asking anyway." Daniel straightened his folder. "The issue is precedent. We remain under regulatory scrutiny following the Harmon matter. Any undocumented technical intervention, regardless of outcome, creates liability exposure we cannot afford." Vivian was quiet. 18 months ago, she would have deferred at once. She was still learning when not to. Daniel wasn't wrong about the liability, and she didn't yet have enough information to know what she was missing. She signed the termination notice. Elias appeared at her office in his work clothes, a gray long-sleeve shirt with the company logo at the chest, clean but carrying the faint trace of machine oil that never entirely left him. He stood without sitting. When he entered, his eyes moved briefly across the room in a habit so swift it was nearly imperceptible, and they stopped for a fraction of a second on the large framed photograph mounted to the left wall. The original GX Series vehicle, captured in Victory Lane at the 2016 championship, confetti falling, the crew surrounding it. In the lower left corner of that photograph, barely legible from where he stood, was a small technical mark. 2 initials and a date, rendered in the same precise hand that had filled the back pages of Nora's picture book the night before. Vivian placed the tablet on the desk with the footage visible. "Can you explain this?" "I repaired the engine," Elias said. "You didn't have clearance to do that. The car runs now." "That isn't what I asked you." Daniel stood slightly to Vivian's left. His voice was smooth and unhurried when he spoke. "Do you understand the value of that vehicle? Do you hold any engineering certification relevant to its systems? On what basis did you believe you were qualified to touch it?" Elias didn't look at Daniel. He kept his eyes on Vivian. "Do you want the car to run?" he said. "Or do you want the documentation to be in order?" The question settled in the space between them. It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't defiant. It was simply the most direct way of asking her to choose, and it had only one honest answer. And that honest answer would require her to explain why she was letting him go regardless. Vivian looked down at the desk. Daniel placed one hand lightly on the back of her chair, barely contact, barely visible, and she looked back up. "I'm sorry, Elias. Your conduct violated our safety protocol and the terms of your position. We're ending your employment effective today." Elias was quiet for 3 seconds. Then he fastened the top button of his shirt slowly, without hurry, and looked at her one last time. "Before the car races this weekend," he said, his voice carrying nothing louder than a suggestion, "you should read the original design drawings for the GX9. Not the current revision, the original, if the company still has them. Then he walked out. Daniel watched the door close. His hand, which had rested on the back of Vivian's chair, pressed briefly into the fabric before he released it. Through 15 floors of glass and steel below the window, the GX9 sat in its bay with an engine that ran exactly the way it was built to run. Vivian stood at the window and looked down at it for a long time after Elias left. She told herself she was thinking about regulatory liability. She was actually thinking about the phrase he had used, the original, and the particular weight he had placed on it. The weight of a word that contains more history than it can hold on its surface. He collected Nora from the neighbor's apartment at 2:30. She was at the kitchen table working on a drawing of what appeared to be a robot assembled entirely from rectangles, and she sprinted to the door when she heard him come in. "You're early," she said, in the pleased voice of someone whose expectations have just been exceeded. "I don't have work anymore," he said. Nora looked at him. "Are you sad?" He crouched to her level, the way he always did when the thing he had to say was real. "No, but we're going to find something new." "Will there be cars at the new place?" He almost smiled. "Every place has cars." She nodded once, satisfied, and returned to her robot. Elias made dinner, watched her eat, read to her, and waited until her breathing slowed in sleep before picking up his phone. He dialed a number he had erased 4 days ago but memorized before erasing, because he memorized things without intending to. 4 rings. Then a voice, older, familiar, carrying the weight of someone who had been expecting this call without ever being certain it would come. "Knew you'd get around to it," Marcus said. "The car gave you away." Race weekend arrived and passed. The GX9 ran every lap without fault and crossed the line in second place, Apex's strongest result in nearly a decade. The pit crew was loud, the engineers were jubilant. Photographs were taken, projections revised, futures reconsidered. Vivian stood at the edge of pit lane in the middle of all of it and felt none of it properly. One hand rested in her jacket pocket, fingers against her phone, and she was thinking about a drawing she hadn't yet found. The car had told her something she hadn't been ready to hear the week before, and now the noise of the celebration felt like a language she understood only partially, as though the event were speaking in a dialect she had grown up near but never formally learned. On Monday morning, she went looking for Marcus. He was in the basement workshop eating lunch alone, seated on the same overturned crate where Elias used to sit, looking out across the bay with the particular stillness of a man who has studied the same view for a very long time and is no longer certain whether he is watching or waiting. "Did you know who he was?" Vivian asked. No preamble. Marcus preferred directness. He chewed slowly, set his sandwich on its wrapper. "I knew by his 3rd day, maybe the 2nd. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because it wasn't mine to tell. He had the right to decide that for himself." He looked at her then. The look of someone who has held a long silence and is now choosing, deliberately, to release it. "But I'll tell you now, since you're asking. Since it's past the point where it changes anything." Vivian sat on a nearby stool. 11 years ago, Marcus said, the previous owner hired a 22-year-old who had no degree, no credentials, and a series of sketches on graph paper. He found him through an online mechanical forum, a small community of self-taught engineers who posted problems for the pleasure of solving them. The owner said it was the most precisely reasoned load distribution analysis he had ever seen from someone who should still have been in a classroom. He paused. The young man's name was Elias Cole. He left university, came here, and over 3 years designed 6 engine variants. The GX9 was the last one, built for the 2018 season.
Vivian's hands were still in her lap. What happened to him? His wife died. Road accident. Their daughter was barely a year old. Marcus didn't soften it. He stated it the way a man states a structural fact, because sentiment would only diminish it. He disappeared, left everything on his desk, and walked out. No one looked very hard. The company was in transition. The owner was already unwell, and there was a great deal of confusion about a great many things. And the drawings, the original set, handwritten with his mark on them, were on his desk when he left. By the time anyone inventoried the handover documents properly, they were gone. He did not say Daniel's name. He didn't need to. The direction of the implication was as clear as a properly seated bearing. Vivian sat with that for a moment. The air in the basement workshop smelled of metal and oil and the particular staleness of a room where ventilation has never quite kept pace with the work being done inside it. Outside on the upper floor, the GX9 sat waiting for its next race. Its engine held the fingerprints of the man who had conceived it, abandoned it, and quietly returned to rescue it when no one else could, and who had then been sent away before anyone thought to ask why he could do what 3 senior engineers could not. She stood. She had a phone call to make, and she already knew the number she was going to ask Marcus for, and she already knew that the conversation that followed would be difficult and necessary and long overdue, in the way that most true conversations are.